Hi again, everyone. Brian Lewis here with Kidney Can, and I'm so happy that you can be with us for another joint edition of the National Kidney Foundation's Facebook Live series. The subject of today's discussion is keeping the best quality of life with kidney cancer. And I'm pleased to be joined today with Alex Kudikoff from Fox Chase Cancer Center in Philadelphia.
Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. He's the chief of the Division of Urology and Urologic Oncology and a professor in the Department of Surgical Oncology at Fox Chase Cancer Center. And I'm also happy to have with us Francesca Maglione.
Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Great to have you here. Francesca is a certified oncology specialist dietitian at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell in Manhattan in the Outpatient Oncology Infusion Center. She primarily provides medical nutrition therapy to patients receiving chemotherapy, immunotherapy, and bone marrow or stem cell transplants. Thank you both for being here today. So let's jump right in. Dr. K, level set the audience for us. What exactly do we mean by quality of life?
Well, quality of life has a lot of academic definitions, but quality of life is exactly what you and I think about as quality of life. It's both our physical well-being, but we got to remember that quality of life really encompasses our emotional well-being as well. And whenever you look at cancer treatments, it's really important that we try to preserve quality of life as much as possible.
Great. And so, Francesca, tell us about your practice. Every day you're at the infusion center in the hospitals with patients. What are some of the common questions that are getting asked about their quality of life?
So that's a good question, Brian. A lot of people first ask me, what do I eat? What do I not eat? Do I need to take supplements? How is this going to affect me? Am I going to, be able to eat because I have nausea? So there's a lot of different questions, and we try and just figure out, where they're at, if they're having any issues now, trying to prevent some of these nutrition issues, and then finding out where their goals are. Where do they want to go with their nutrition?
Great. Well, as a patient myself, one of the things that I remember really vividly was I was through surgery right around the end of October, and Thanksgiving was coming up, and I lost my appetite entirely. And so I can see that wanting to eat and needing the nutrition for your body is important. So tell us, what are some of the sort of basic things that you ask your patients or tell your patients from a resource standpoint that they can look for?
Sure, absolutely. So like you said, having surgery affects your appetite in many different ways. The surgery itself, the stress of the surgery, medications you might be on to help with nausea or pain, or even antibiotics could affect your appetite or have other symptoms that are going to affect the way that you want to eat. So I ask all those questions to figure out why their appetite has changed. Could we make a change with any of those factors so we could get the appetite to improve? And if we can't, how do we change the way that you're eating or what you're eating to get you that nutrition in this critical time?
Great. And so, Dr. Kudikoff, with the quality of life, trying to get back to where you were and trying to understand what you've gone through, this is a life-changing experience, and you now are sort of post-diagnosis, and you're trying to figure out, how do I get back there? Tell us some of the things from a social or psychosocial standpoint that you advise clients to be thinking about and doing.
Yes, absolutely. So one great thing about kidney cancer is that most patients can really return to their baseline quality of life, and hopefully to even a higher level now that this event has happened in their lives. A lot of the challenge here is really managing uncertainty. And managing uncertainty is what really lowers our quality of life in terms of just our emotional state. This dramatic has happened in our lives. It's dramatic, it's traumatic, and it's very difficult to let the dust settle, especially on the emotional end, once the sort of our physical well-being has been restored. And really managing this uncertainty, working with your provider team to better understand what are the risks, what are the risks that surround my prognosis, what can I do to mitigate those risks. Some of the things I tell my patients is that, listen, a lot of the times, this is behind you. This is in your rearview mirror. And the things that you can do now is push a reset button in your life and actually try to mitigate all these other risks to your health that are competing with kidney cancer. And sometimes those risks are actually higher than the kidney cancer itself.
So, Francesca, following up on this, so when I, post-diagnosis, was going through recovery, one of the things I was trying to reassess was I need to exercise more, I need to be more, healthy in my eating habits. How do you advise patients through that process?
Sure. So I think what Dr. Kudikoff said is Absolutely true. Getting rid of some of that uncertainty is really helpful. And I think when people who are going through this process are able to take control of their diet, take control of the way that they're moving their body, that gives them some sense of control in a situation where it doesn't really seem like they have a lot of control. People who have had surgery or haven't had surgery, I advise them to start small. I don't want you to get injured while you're going through this process, pull a leg or something. So sometimes I advise people to start with something like chair yoga, 15 minutes, 2 times a week, really simple exercises that are going to help the body as well as the mind during this process.
Right. And Dr. Kudorov, one of the things that what a couple of nurses have said to me is, get up and move around and try to be active as soon as you can post-surgery or in your recovery time to try to be mobile, to start building those sort of building blocks to get back to where you were. Do you advise that? Tell me what you're telling your patients?
Yeah, absolutely. In the past, historically, many decades ago, rest was prescribed. You had to rest, you had to lie in bed, and you had to really take care of yourself and not do too much. This has been a 180 reversal on this. Especially post-surgery, it's very important to be active as soon as possible, as much as possible. It's not running a marathon right away, but it's really getting out there, having walks around the neighborhood, not lying in bed as much as possible, and really trying to get back to your usual activity. And that's important for very immediate risks of preventing what's called thrombotic events, which are clots in your legs, clots go into your lungs. The more active you are, the less chances of a catastrophic event like that is happening. So that's really important. But also talking about the emotional well-being, we know that physical exercise and being active really helps you manage the immense stress that you're under around the time of treatment. So being active is really, really important piece here.
Yeah, and I think what you're touching on is, there's no one size fits all. Every patient is individualistic, that has their own set of circumstances. And so I'm curious to hear, some of the folks that are out there aren't going to be able to immediately jump up and, start training for a marathon. It's going to take quite a while. So you encourage that through sort of ongoing daily activity?
Right, absolutely, and I think Francesca speak to this as well. It's first it's baby steps. It's really getting out of bed, making sure you're not lying on the couch, making sure you're taking care of your activities of daily living, making sure you're going to for the walks, but then getting into a routine exercise. There's really nice recommendations from the American Cancer Society about how much exercise one should need, and the most important thing here is that really not only cardiovascular health, but actually cancer risk is decreased when you exercise regularly. It's about 10 to 20 minutes a day is often enough. Obviously, the more about double that is best. But even not strenuous exercise, about 20 minutes a day on average, really makes a huge difference in somebody's prognosis from their cancer standpoint.
Great. Yeah. So I want to touch on something which is right now with the number of systemic therapies that we have out there, now 14 or 17. Everybody is going through some different side effects that are on these. It affects different people different ways. Some people have fatigue, some people have nausea, some people have skin irritations, other things. Do you see this quite often, Francesca? And what do you advise for people?
I do. So I think the best approach is starting to know what you're possibly going to deal with early and getting prepared for that. Having your medications filled, having the right foods in the house, having snacks handy, having nutrition drinks if you need them, having different methods to deal with, maybe different types of nausea that might come up. Something I find patients find really helpful, and it's a really simple strategy, is when they come into the infusion center, a lot of them pick up really bad smells that could cause nausea and cause them to feel really awful. I advise them to keep something that smells good on them, even if it's just like an alcohol pad or an aromatherapy tab or something to just relieve that. So preventing these symptoms and being prepared for them, I think, is the best strategy to manage them.
So I want to touch on, just to follow up, so with all of these side effects going on, and you have different ages and different lifestyles and different socioeconomic backgrounds, what would you suggest from looking at the whole situation with the caregiver as well? How do you advise everybody in that situation as they're dealing with their treatment?
Right. I think the key here is to to make sure that the communication channels are open. Some folks, the way they approach cancer care is in a very stoic fashion. They're just, they're going to grin and bear and get through whatever is in their way. And what's important to know is it's important to tell your care provider that these are the side effects that you're having, because there's often lots of ways to manage that. There's dose reductions, there's periods of breaks that you can take in therapies without really having any any detrimental effects to the therapy itself. So it's important that even if you're the type of person that's very stoic, that's just willing to kind of go through everything possible, just make sure you let the provider know that side effects you're having, because a lot of the times there's lots of ways to mitigate that.
Francesca, do you do anything or advise your patients any sort of practical steps for communicating or keeping track of what you're telling them? Do they keep journals, or do you?
That's a great question. So I have a lot of people that find it's really beneficial to take pictures of what they're eating or keep their own food diary. It helps them feel in control of what they're eating, and also helps them reflect on the days that they're doing really well and the days that they're not doing well. And the next time they have a cycle coming up, they could prepare better. They could look back on their diary and say, I did have 3 days where I really didn't eat that much. So next cycle, when I know on Thursday to Saturday I'm not going to eat well, they aren't as worried about it. They know what to expect. They know on Sunday that they could start to expect their appetite coming back.
So this ties into one of the things that I tried to do, which was set some basic goals as I was going through recovery to make sure that I was on a track. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little about goal setting and tying that into communications with your patients.
Right, absolutely. I think expectations and goal setting is incredibly important. Obviously we're speaking to patients who've had kidney cancer, and that's a really diverse group. There are patients with stage 1 disease that the hurdle they had to clear was surgery, and then once they're done with surgery, really the only thing that's necessary is close monitoring. And there are folks who come in with much more advanced disease who are looking at systemic therapies that have their own challenges. So expectations need to be tailored to each individual patient, and it's really important for the patients to sort of ask the right questions. One of the biggest suggestions I have is, obviously medical, modern healthcare is incredibly hectic, and everybody's busy. But if you come in with a prepared list of questions and expectations that you want to communicate to your physician, where they may not be the things that the physician is expecting, and just make sure that you're prepared for the visit and ask the questions and get everything answered. And really, you should expect that all your questions be answered in every visit. I think I
think you hit on something, which is when I was growing up, the medical system that I grew up under was sort of paternalistic, where you came into the doctor was here, and you were here. Now it's the playing field's leveling out a little bit, and there's more shared decision making that's going on. And so if you have goals and a plan and keeping track of what you're doing, I think that's going to be helpful for everybody. So taking, I guess, to the audience, taking ownership of your treatment is a big part of this.
Yeah. I tell my patients a journey we take together, and everybody sort of has different goals and different priorities on that journey, and it's important to really communicate that.
And so one size doesn't fit all. But I was a big fan of keeping a notebook and bringing my notebook with me everywhere, and it had my slides and scans, and and I kept notes. Do you see a lot of patients with a notebook or something like that, or electronic device?
I think some people also use apps, and then pictures are really important, taking pictures of written stuff so they have a digital copy. I think being in the day and age of having so much technology at our hands, I do a lot of communication through their patient portal. We even are able to do video visits and kind of check in maybe when they're at those periods of time when they're having those issues at home, and we can work on very specific goals for maybe that day, as opposed to long-term goals that are going to be years out.
Great. And one of the things I'm always curious about is, you have some folks that have specific goals, like I want to see my daughter graduate from high school, or I want to walk my son, daughter up the aisle, things like that. So when you have folks that are sort of beaten down, what advice do you give them, to try to get back to their quality of life when they're sort of troubled?
Right, right. And I think it's very important to hear, because sometimes you meet patients and, obviously you want to make it to a certain point in time, and sometimes we can and cannot control that. But sometimes it's things that are very manageable, and sort of information that we get from patients is very actionable. For instance, somebody gets diagnosed with a new tumor, they have a child's wedding or a grandchild's wedding that's coming up in the next couple of months. Well, that's really important to know. A wait of 2-3 months often is negligible in terms of the natural history of the cancer, and we can just go forward with treatment after that important event. So those kind of things are very important to communicate to one's physicians, because a lot of the times the timeline can be calibrated in order to accommodate for that.
Back to the communication theme,
Absolutely.
which is making sure that everybody's on the same page. That makes a lot of sense. So one of the things that I was curious about is, you've got personal values that come into play. You've got the age, the sex of the person, where they are socioeconomically. And I was talking to one of our patient friends recently, and she has a cycle where she's on for 2 weeks and then off for 4 weeks. Talk a little bit about the timing that goes into that, and the social issues around that.
I can take that one. It's, so sounds like that individual is in the medicine, a targeted therapy called sunitinib, where yes, it's a medicine that actually was developed with these 2-week rest periods, because sometimes the side effects really accumulate, and sometimes certain events need to be scheduled around that cycle. And again, important for patients to understand that some folks have more side effects or less side effects when they're on treatment. And again, it's important just to see where you are going to be, talk to your provider. But sometimes, somebody you have spoken to is going to have a certain set of side effects that you may not have.
Got it. So I'm going to ask you, Francesca, for those out there, tell us some of the resources that they might be able to rely on or go to find out more information about these issues.
Absolutely. So once again, we have so much information available, and sometimes it's too much information, it's overwhelming, and not all of it is reliable. So I really like to make sure that I'm providing my patients with resources, first of all, that are going to get them the right information. As for nutrition, I'll refer them to a website called oncologydietitian.com is one of them. The American Cancer Society, the World Cancer Research Fund has great resources as well. I refer them to YouTube a lot, because everyone learns in different ways, and I find that sometimes watching a video, hearing, seeing it all at the same time could be really helpful, whether it's different stories, whether it's exercise videos, meditation videos, information on nutrition, that people really respond well to that.
Great. So you touched on something there at the end with yoga. So we haven't really touched on sort of the spiritual side of your quality of life. And so do you see that that's a question that comes up a lot, Dr. Kudikoff or Francesca, about people in their emotional sort of recovery? Is the spirituality component important to a lot of people?
Of course. We're human, and that's a huge part of most of our lives. And yes, when it's really something that we can lean on in a time like this.
Yeah.
I think, not particularly sort of the spiritual part, but there is a lot of information out there, like Francesca said. There's a lot of videos. There's a lot of sort of enthusiasm around certain treatments or certain therapies, and we really important to communicate with your physician on, what are the modifiable risk factors? What are the things that actually have been proven to change outcomes? And for kidney cancer, for instance, there's really 2 big ones. One is obesity. Reducing and maintaining one's healthy weight is really important. It really has been shown to improve one's prognosis, both in the cancer realm and outside the cancer realm. And the other was quitting smoking. Sometimes I have patients who come to me and they have certain homeopathic treatments or vitamins that they want to take, but they're still smoking 2 packs a week. Quitting smoking is the big ticket item. Quitting smoking is really an important piece here.
Got it.
Yep. And going back to the spiritual aspect, a lot of the times if I'm hearing from the patient that they're struggling with those kind of issues, I rely pretty heavily on our social workers in our department and even nurse navigators to really support the patients and provide even more resources from a psychosocial aspect.
Got it. So to these issues of resources that people can find, we've touched on sort of diet a little bit and exercise and quitting and some of these changes in your lifestyle. one of the things I heard about recently is that there are a couple of institutions, I believe it's either Uber or Lyft, that are now offering transport subsidies to hospitals. And I think it's one of the major hotel chains like, I believe it's Embassy Suites, sorry for the plug there, but is also offering some discounts. So there's a lot of other resources out there that are changing the landscape. From back to this notebook concept, are there decision aids that you all share with your patients that help them with sort of walking through this process? Do you have any decision aids? Do you all have anything?
Yeah, so we actually, not routinely, but for the right patients and for those interested, we use predictive models. There's a lot of predictive models that the academic literature has produced, which is basically trying to understand what risks surround a certain situation and how to potentially use those risks to make treatment decisions. We have a website on our portal where these things are operationalized for point of care, so we can actually use a predictive model and plug in a particular patient situation and calculate some of these risks. Again, sometimes that's really helpful for some patients. For some patients, when that information is not actionable, where the next step is clear, it's potentially not the most useful of information. So I usually try to tailor it to each particular patient. But yeah, there's a lot of tools that are available out there.
Francesca, do you have any other aids or resources? I know you mentioned a couple already. Anything else?
So I find that patients do pretty well with sometimes tracking their stuff on apps. Like I said, they could track their exercise, they could track what they're eating, and then we could use that to talk about specific plans for them. Typically, I use a lot of written information, and I'll give them some specific goals to aim for as far as certain amounts of foods to eat per day. And I find that focusing on the positive aspect of nutrition, hey, I want you to include these foods, instead of focusing so much on what you should avoid, tends to keep things in a more positive atmosphere, and I think it helps them from a mental aspect as well.
Yeah, I'm going to do a shameless plug here. There's an organization out there on the internet called Smart Patients that offers a kidney cancer community, and it has an array of conversations going on with specific examples of what people are going through, and it's really sort of an honor system of sharing information. It's really a plethora of good ideas out there. But folks, why don't we take a look at some of the questions that folks on Facebook have been asking. And I'll remind you that if you have any questions on this subject, please post them in the comment section, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. And if we run out of time, please know that all your questions will be addressed on the National Kidney Foundation and kidneycan.org's Facebook pages after the program. Now, looks like we have a question for Dr. Kudikov here. Dr. Kudikov, can you comment on shared decision-making and the quality of life within the various stages of life and age and sex, and what you tell your patients? That's a little bit on what we touched on earlier.
Yeah, but I think this point cannot be sort of overemphasized. This is, I tell patients this, is, everybody manages risks differently in their life. And what I think is the best approach may not be what that particular person thinks is the best approach. And it's a conversation. It's me communicating to the patient what I think is the particular next step, and them asking me, what if this is delayed? What if this is not done? What are the chances? And then it's a conversation to really pick the right approach for the right patient.
Got it. Okay, and it's also asking, Francesca, where can I find some other resources with everyday issues such as food sources or transportation or financial support? I think you've touched on these a little bit.
Absolutely.
Any additional ones you might have?
So I generally don't provide these resources, but like I said, I would look to your social worker, look to your nurse navigator. They're going to be the team members that are really going to help you get the right resources for you. I think a lot of the times patients feel like these additional resources are things that they have to take care of themselves. The doctor's taking care of their medicine, the nurse is providing it, and the rest of the stuff they have to do on their own. And they really don't. We're really still working as a team, whether it comes to, helping you get financial assistance or just helping you get a ride to treatment that day.
And I would just echo that, and I would say these kind of resources are really very powerful at the local level. The social workers are really plugged into them, and it really depends on where you are in the particular area. So sometimes they're hard to find on the internet, for instance, but talking to the social worker, those will become apparent, and there are really a lot of ways to help patients, and don't feel like you have to go this alone. Really talk to the social worker, to your provider and the social worker at your particular hospital.
Sure. So I want to shift gears a little bit. So many patients post-surgery may only have one kidney, and there is, and I'm just trying to read this, there's a risk vis-a-vis CKD, chronic kidney disease. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Right, absolutely. So kidney cancer treatment puts one at risk of having chronic kidney disease. And we've talked about sort of dietary changes today, but if somebody has severe CKD, then there's a whole different approach to managing their diet. And Francesca can speak to that in a second, but it's important to speak to the provider about particular choices, especially surgery, where it'd be a radical nephrectomy, removal of the whole kidney versus a partial nephrectomy, and what to expect with regard to kidney function. Because sometimes when a certain surgery is performed and enough of the kidney, what's called parenchyma, or the kidney tissue is removed, then somebody can sort of face this particular situation where their overall kidney function is not strong enough to support their body. And then there are other considerations to account for here.
Yeah. So one of the things as a patient I was advised was drink a lot of water, but also moderation was my wife went out. Sorry, Marisa, went out and bought like 5 books on macrobiotics and cooking, and those lasted a little while. But my doctor said to me, Brian, you can eat just about anything within reason, but moderate. Is that a fair statement?
So I'd say that's a fair statement, especially for a starting approach. And a lot of the times people who have this risk of chronic kidney disease or actually have it, they come to me and they want to know, what can I do to protect my kidneys? And really the best diet that you could use to kind of keep that quality of life going by protecting your kidney is going to be more of a plant-based diet. So we find that fruits and vegetables, whole grains, seeds and nuts tend to actually provide protective benefits to the kidneys, whereas diets that are higher in sugar, higher in meat tend to not necessarily damage the kidney more, but they make the kidneys work harder. And when we're trying to protect the kidneys, that's not really the best way to treat them.
Okay.
In addition, that kind of eating plan also helps with certain conditions like diabetes and hypertension, which could damage the kidneys even further. So you're really targeting a lot of different potential issues by following that type of eating plan.
So let me see if I can summarize that. You said protect your kidney that you have by eating leafy vegetables, sort of a Mediterranean diet.
We typically use the term plant-based diet, which is going to be the base of your diet is going to come from plant foods and specifically whole foods, foods that are in their most natural form.
Got it.
But yeah, I was just going to add this decision. So here to kind of get a little more technical, especially for patients with kidney tumors that face a decision between taking the whole kidney out, which is called a radical nephrectomy, versus a partial nephrectomy, which is just taking a part of the kidney out, is really nuanced, and it's really important to sort of have a provider who has a lot of experience with it. Although on the face of it, it seems like taking part of the kidney sounds as the best approach. In most situations it is. Those are the guidelines for especially small tumors. Just taking part of the kidney makes a lot of sense. Those surgeries sometimes, especially in elderly and more frail patients, they carry higher risk. And sometimes that decision is calibrated to the side of just doing the simpler operation, which is a radical nephrectomy, especially if the other kidney is completely healthy, is going to last your lifetime, and you are less likely to tolerate any sort of complications that are involved with the more complex surgery.
Got it. So I want to shift gears a little bit from diet over to the psychosocial end of things. One of the terms that I've learned about is called scanxiety, the fear or the anxiousness that patients have leading up to getting their monthly, tri-monthly or half-year scans. Can you talk a little bit about any resources out there? Because it's an issue that affects just about every patient.
Sure. I think what you mentioned about, reaching out to other people that are going through the same thing could be a big relief. I think, focusing on our diet could actually help with our mental health. Focusing on our exercise could help with our mental health. And if we're in a better state mentally, it doesn't eliminate that anxiety, but it could help you make sure that it's not going to be as harmful to your body otherwise.
Got it. So here we have another question. So we have over 15 million Americans now living as cancer survivors. And do people ever get to a, quote, new normal in their quality of life? And so I can answer that one for myself. Yeah. I feel like, my wife and kids will disagree, but I think I've actually sort of increased my gusto for living based on that treatment and the diagnosis. And I would imagine other people feel that way too. So you have any?
Yeah, I would say it absolutely. And I think most patients get to that point where it's behind them. But I would just advise those folks who are out there dealing with it now is be patient. Both the physical exhaustion and emotional exhaustion, they a lot of times dovetail. Almost everybody gets blue and sometimes really has a clinical depression after an event like this, and you have to reach out for support and you have to give yourself enough time. Even if physically you're completely healed, emotionally you're not always completely healed, and sometimes that dark cloud is over you for months and months and months, but just give it time, the clouds will lift and you'll get back to your old self, and it just takes time.
Yeah, and I that's a great point, because I think that one of the things that patients struggle with is when they have these new symptoms that they may have never had before, how do you communicate that with your caregivers? And so the caregivers out there should probably understand there may be times when the patients are having a tough time, and you just have to sort of bear with them and sort of hold their hands and help them through that time and get to the other side. All right. All right. So let's see if we have one more question here. Caregivers also are impacted by a cancer diagnosis. How do we help them cope and make sure that they have a quality of life that returns to some sort of normalcy? Anybody want to take that one on?
I can start off with this. I've participated in some support groups, and I find that the caregivers find that really beneficial. I think making time for things that people enjoy, especially when it comes to us discussing food, a lot of times there's this conflict of knowing what they should eat and having foods that may be comfort foods, and understanding if that's something that you relate to, allowing that to be part of your quality of life. You know, if having a slice of chocolate cake is going to make you feel better the day after treatment, then please do that, because that is going to contribute to your quality of life.
Sure, sure. So one of the things that I was thinking about when you talked about that is, I think post-diagnosis, from a patient perspective, I have a new appreciation for life. And I think that's an important thing that people, you know, hopefully are watching this will say, you know, this has been a traumatic experience, it's been difficult, and everybody's circumstances are different, but every day now takes on a new significance going forward. So that's great. So let's just go back for a second. I sort of want to pick up on this caregiver issue, because there's so many sort of unsung heroes out there that are standing beside their partner, their spouse, their good friends, and just sort of helping them through this period. Are there resources for them as well? I don't know, from a psychosocial standpoint, do the caregivers have a place that they could go?
I think the patient advocacy groups certainly have a community of caregivers as well. I think, you know, from at least the perspective of a surgeon, a clinician, is what I see is, again, this uncertainty that envelops this whole event. I think it really helps the caregivers understand what to expect, and alleviates a lot of the worry when, I think, you know, things are just communicated appropriately. And a lot of the times there is uncertainty that you just cannot get rid of, but a lot of the times the things that folks worry about, as long, you know, once they express them and once the physicians sort of communicate what the expectations are, I think it alleviates a lot of the stress out there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've noticed over these past number of years is that there's a new sense out there that the C word is not a curse word anymore, and we now are living with it. We have 15 million, you know, survivors here in the United States, and we're going to plow through this, and it's not something that you have to hide sort of behind the curtain anymore. It's something that's out there. We're dealing with it. Patients are dealing with it. There's shared decision making. There's a community out there, and so that's good news for all of us. So, well, I wish we could all continue talking here, but I'm afraid we're out of time. But again, I remind you that in case we didn't get around to answering your question, please check on the National Kidney Foundation and Kidney Can's Facebook pages, where we'll be posting the answers throughout the coming days. You can also contact NKF's helpline toll-free at 855-NKF-CARES. And I'd like to thank our sponsors for their very generous support in helping to make this program possible. But I'd especially like to thank Drs. Kudikoff and Francesco Maglione for joining us today. Both of you were so helpful in talking about all these tough issues, and we really appreciate your time and efforts in this disease. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian, for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now, on behalf of the National Kidney Foundation and Kidney Can, until next time, I'd like to wish you all good health. So thank you. I really appreciate it. That was good.
That was
really,
good. Yeah.
I actually